Okay, let's jump right into this deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that's, well, it's always buzzing around the NBA. What does it really take to be a superstar? And we're specifically going to look at it through the lens of, marketability and personality, centered around one of the most dominant players today, Nikola Jokic.
Right. And the source material we're digging into for this is a really fascinating article. It discusses criticisms about Jokic's personality, and they come from a pretty unique perspective, his former teammate DeMarcus Cousins.
Exactly. So, our mission here really is to pull out the key insights from this piece. Like, what does this article and Cousins' viewpoint tell us about how we define an NBA superstar now? Why might a player like Jokic, with his, undeniable success on the court, still be seen as kind of a challenge to sell? And, what does this whole conversation reveal about what fans and maybe the business side of basketball prioritize today?
Yeah, it really taps into that ongoing debate, doesn't it? Who is the true face of the NBA right now? The article even puts Jokic in that mix, along with players like Tyrese Halliburton, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, and it points out, interestingly, how this discussion often has this extra layer when we talk about international players.
Absolutely. First, though, let's just establish what this article makes crystal clear about Jokic's game. His credentials are, well, they're off the charts. It highlights him winning 3 of the last 5 MVP awards and, of course, leading the Nuggets to that NBA championship. Purely on performance, he's in really rare air.
Undeniably, he really is. And then you have DeMarcus Cousins weighing in. The piece notes their connection. They were teammates for a bit, about 29 games, I think, back in the second half of the 2021-22 season. So yeah, while that close connection could bring some bias, right, the article suggests Cousins believes there's actual substance to what he's saying, despite that potential.
Okay, so what's the core of Cousins' argument as the article presents it? It really seems to hammer this one idea. You can't sell him, you can't market him because he's not this great personality. That's the quote, basically.
Yeah, and the article really emphasizes that Cousins frames this as something Jokic chooses. It's not that he can't be that personality. He says it's by choice for Jokic, that he just doesn't care about the spotlight, doesn't want to be that kind of, globally marketable, high-profile guy.
That's a really key distinction the article makes. It's presented as a choice, not some kind of deficiency. And based on that idea, how does Cousins, according to this piece, define what a superstar needs to be, at least in terms of marketability?
He lays out a few things. He talks about being known globally, right? Having an impact that's bigger than the States. And possessing charisma. For Cousins, like the article describes, it's a combination of all those things. It's got to be more than just the on-court stuff.
Okay, right. So if that's the bar Cousins sets for marketability, what specific reasons does the article mention reflecting his view for why Jokic might be seen as hard to sell?
Well, one point made in the piece is that his personality, it isn't necessarily appealing to the crowds, to use the phrasing from the article, quoting Cousins. And the article throws in this interesting statistic that, some might point to here. It mentions the Denver Nuggets 2023 Finals series. It was the 5th least watched in the modern era. Now, the article kind of floats that as something that could maybe support the idea of less broad appeal, but it doesn't draw a hard line,
That's a fascinating detail they include. And it also digs into something else that comes up a lot with Jokic, this idea that basketball might not be the absolute single all-consuming focus of his life.
Right. Yeah, the piece notes he openly enjoys other things, like famously watching his horse races in his free time. He's admitted this loads of times. It's not hidden. And the article suggests this leads to a perception, for some at least, that Jokic does not symbolize what the general sense of a great role model player would be. Why? Precisely because basketball isn't the absolute center of his universe 24/7.
That perspective is really interesting, especially how the article then tries to put it into some historical context. It suggests that this expectation, that the face of the NBA has to have basketball just consuming their entire existence, that might be influenced by figures like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant.
Yes, exactly. It points to Kobe's legendary, almost mythical work ethic and discipline, and then Jordan's resilience, that insane competitiveness, and even his acknowledged slightly flawed lifestyle. The article basically argues that these guys set a powerful precedent. They created this kind of archetype of the basketball icon as someone utterly defined by the game, even with their relatable human struggles.
Right. And then, to really hammer this point home, the article introduces a contrast, Anthony Edwards. It presents him as much closer to fitting that mold, of the next widely accepted face of the league. And why? Because according to the piece, he seems to embody that undying obsession with the game, but, and this is crucial, pairs it with that kind of flawed lifestyle that shows, despite his superhuman capabilities, he is still human.
It's that combination, the article seems to argue, which fits the mold shaped by the Jordan-Kobe era,
Yeah.
and that maybe resonates more right now from a purely marketing perspective.
It's about the total package, the narrative.
Yeah, exactly. The story you can sell. That seems to be the angle, at least from Cousins' perspective, as presented. And looking at all these points together, the piece reiterates Cousins' stance that he sees merit, his word, in the idea that Jokic, despite his sheer dominance, is just challenging to sell in this modern era because he doesn't quite fit that particular superstar mold.
So let's zoom out. Why is this conversation, based on this source, something worth you, the listener, thinking about? It really pushes us to consider how we define superstar today. Is it strictly about putting up unbelievable numbers, stacking MVPs, winning championships, just the stats and the rings?
Or does that definition inherently include things like marketability, a certain kind of personality, that global public appeal?
Yeah.
How much does that stuff weigh in?
Yeah, and it really highlights that tension, doesn't it, between a player's personal priorities, like Jokic's pretty clear choice to live life on his own terms, outside the constant glare and the massive expectations and, frankly, demands that come with being an icon in a global sport. It's a huge media landscape now.
It feels like a debate between pure performance
Yeah.
and public persona.
Mm.
Or maybe how those two things are perceived to intersect or need to intersect to define that global stardom today.
Exactly. So looking at what this article laid out, you've got DeMarcus Cousins' view suggesting Nikola Jokic's marketability is, well, impacted by his conscious personality choices and his interests outside basketball. And this view is contrasted with a maybe more traditional idea of what a basketball superstar should embody, an idea possibly shaped by historical figures like Jordan and Kobe.
Right, and an idea that seems, according to this piece anyway, more aligned with newer figures like Anthony Edwards currently.
The article really presents the case that while Jokic's game is just undeniable, maybe historically great,
Absolutely.
the factors that have traditionally made a player globally sellable might be elements he simply isn't prioritizing. It's his choice.
Which, yeah, brings us to that bigger question, this whole deep dive kind of prompts based on the source material. If being arguably the most dominant player on the planet, with multiple MVPs and a championship ring, if that isn't automatically enough to make you easily marketable as the face of the league, what does that suggest about what the business of basketball and maybe even fans truly value or perhaps prioritize in this modern era?
That's a great question. What do you think it takes to be a true global superstar today? What's the defining factor for you?